So everyone, thanks for coming out. We're going to start off with a quick intro, talk a little bit about what has changed in Office 365 since the last time that we met. We're going to hand it over to our very generous sponsors for a little bit of insight into what they do and how they do it. And then we'll kick it off with our main presentation with Bob German. So we typically do a raffle at the end, and we're changing the format of the raffle. We used to give away raffle tickets. Now we're actually just going to ask trivia questions at the end. So pay attention throughout the whole presentation, and you might win a gift card towards the end. So my name is Dmitry Repetov. I'm one of the three hosts of the Boston Office 365 user group. We also have Mike Dixon to my left, as well as Dave Losey, who couldn't be with us tonight. So last time we had a session presented by Mike and Dave about PowerShell and how to use it with Office 365. If you didn't have a chance to come check out our session last time, we did post the slides on our website, and we might be posting the videos soon as well. We're still experimenting with broadcasting and recording the sessions. So today's session is being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, just don't say anything. We'll be good. Okay, so let's kick off with a few updates. So this week on Tuesday, Microsoft held the SharePoint Virtual Summit. If you have not had a chance to look at it, definitely check it out. It's about 2.5 hours long. They outlined a ton of new things that are coming in the coming year in the world of SharePoint. So what I'll cover is a subset of what was announced, but if you haven't seen this, definitely come check it out. So the first update since last time is that now you can share files directly from your Windows Explorer or your Mac Finder. So Microsoft, over the last few months, has released this new interface that makes it a lot easier to share files. So as long as you have OneDrive syncing your files, you can now manage it directly out of your native operating system. And additionally, they've announced a new feature called Files on Demand. The idea being that you might subscribe to terabytes worth of different document libraries, OneDrive shares, etc., but you don't necessarily want to sync all that to your environment at any given time. And while today you can go ahead and do selective sync where you pick which folders you want to sync, it's still going to be syncing all that data down every time. What this does is that it lets you basically sync files on demand. So it'll show you all of the things that are available to you, but it won't actually download the file until you click on it. And furthermore, if you wanted to go offline and you know you'll need some files in the future, you also have the ability to manually select the files that you want to force sync offline. So you could have a 100 gigabyte drive in your laptop, but have a few terabytes worth of content available to you just a click away. Pretty cool stuff. This will be available only for Windows 10, and it's coming this summer in preview mode. So definitely watch out for that.
So that's been announced, but it's not available now?
Correct. The other big announcement was Microsoft is releasing a new communications site template for Office 365. So this is based on the same framework that the modern team sites are based upon, but they're expanding it further. They're letting you have multiple column layouts now. It comes with a number of different web parts pre-configured that you can keep or you could replace, you could change. It really gives you a head start to kicking off an intranet and communications-based site in the new framework. So this is going to be released this summer into first release, and we expect it'll be available before the end of the year for general availability. Next, so Yammer is not dead.
Not dead yet.
Every time we think it's going to die, it comes back up with more investment from Microsoft. So there's a new integration with SharePoint. So the biggest problem with tying Yammer and SharePoint together has always been the permissibility model. In SharePoint, you have rich permissions, you could set AD groups, you could have dynamic membership, you could do all these great things. Yammer, it was pretty much a flat list of who's an administrator, who's a member, and there was no way to keep the two in sync. So if I go into my SharePoint publishing site and I say the whole sales team AD group distribution list has access to the sales content, I can't go and do the same thing in Yammer. I'd have to go and list every user individually, which makes it really complicated to do syncs. So Microsoft improved that with groups, where they actually now allow groups to have the similar SharePoint site with the same permissions, same Yammer site. And now they're taking it a step further and they're actually integrating it better. They've also announced that a new web part will be coming out for the Yammer integration. So it won't be the same iframe embed experience that you have today. It'll actually be using the APIs and be more SharePoint frameworky than it is today. There's a few more things with Yammer. They've also added the ability to add inline videos from Microsoft Stream, which is the replacement for Office 365 video. It's the next iteration of it, per se. And now you can post it directly, a link to it, it'll show it online, you can have discussions. And then they're also releasing new apps for iPad, Windows, and Mac. So if you want to Yammer on the go, you're going to have new options coming out pretty soon. Actually, it's available as of today. And lastly, for Yammer, they've also enabled dynamic groups now. So on a per group basis, you can go into your settings as an administrator and enable dynamic groups, which will basically create an Office 365 group in the background. And now you can have a same policy object that you could apply to your SharePoint sites, your planner, your teams, and so forth. Pretty cool stuff. I mean, this is what Yammer's been missing since the day that they tried to integrate it. Was it 6 years ago now? So I'm very glad that we're finally here. So the next announcement that was here, and again, I'm just giving you kind of the highlights. There's a lot more if you watch the video. There's new integration with Power Apps and Flow into SharePoint lists. So in this example, what you're seeing pop up on the right side is actually a Power App, which is different than what we had before. So before, you could design your Power Apps in the browser. You needed an actual device to be able to interact with the forms. Now they come up in browser. So this isn't necessarily a replacement for InfoPath, but it's starting to gain more territory on what InfoPath could have done had Microsoft continued to develop that. So good stuff there. Next, Microsoft is continuing to improve on the Delve experience, including the Delve search. Now if you do a search in Delve, not only will it bring back files and documents and other items, it will also start bringing back people that might be associated. It's kind of not a big deal, but it is a big deal because now they're finally allowing you to do that in Delve. So next thing, there's a bunch of updates that Microsoft released in the education space. I know we have some members that are part of universities and K-12. So now there's a new way to interact with Microsoft Teams in the classroom. And if you look at Microsoft's education blogs, they have a lot of great functionality that they're tailoring specifically for that space. There's a number of OneNote improvements. So they're improving it for people that use assistive devices for higher contrast or audibility. They're simplifying the navigation controls. I know it would always drive me crazy when I had my workbooks on the left side, I had my tabs across the top, I had my pages on the right side. Now they're actually giving you a normal information architecture. They're also taking this experience and making it consistent across all devices. So before, if you were on a Windows or Mac, if you're on your phone or your tablet, it was a different experience. They're unifying that. And then lastly, they're also adding a few additional options from OneNote in the education space, where parents can now have a read-only view to what's happening, as well as giving you more granularity with permissions in that space. And last update since last time, for those small business owners or users that have been using the Outlook Customer Manager, it's a super lightweight CRM system built right in Outlook, and it's pretty neat for what it does. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you to use this over like a Salesforce or Dynamics, but if you're running a small shop, this is pretty useful. So they finally released it out of their preview mode and it's rolling out as general availability globally. So that being said, that's all for the updates.
Dimitri, can I toss in two new things as well?
Go ahead.
On the Visio front, because that's where I live. Visio Pro for Office 365 receives much more frequent enhancements than Visio Professional, Visio Pro being the subscription service. And as of May 1st, there is now a new Visio add-in called Data Visualizer, which creates process maps automatically from data in Excel. So you lay out the steps in your process, indicate which tasks precede and follow other tasks in Excel, and Visio builds either a flowchart or a swim lane diagram for you. And it's a dynamic connection, so you can update the Excel data, and the diagram will be updated in addition. Second thing, Visio Online was released about 3 months ago, as a means for viewing Visio diagrams, both VSDX and legacy VSD diagrams, in any browser on any device, and it works amazingly. I've demonstrated Safari on a Mac or Safari on an iPad, and it all works fine. There's a private preview that was announced 2 days ago, and if you're interested, see me before the end of the evening for diagram creation in a browser. So Visio diagram creation in a web browser. And that is, as I said, it's a private preview, but it is available now.
Awesome, thank you.
That's really cool.
All right.
That was an awesome summary, by the way, I may say.
You know, it's tough because there's so many good
they
things.
so much stuff in there, and
you gotta crunch it down to 2 minutes. Yeah. So huge thanks to
Well,
Backup 5 for hosting us here tonight, providing us with amazing food and drinks. So thank you. We'll pass it on to Joe.
A second here before I turn on my mic. And give me 2 seconds to get up and running. So, as I'm sure we're all aware, last week was a pretty big week in the world of OneDrive and SharePoint and Microsoft in general with that fun that was the WannaCry ransomware. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to use, what we're going to do today is we're going to leverage the Backupify platform, which is a SaaS-based backup solution for Microsoft Office. And we're going to recover not just an affected environment, but a live infected environment. So what we're going to do here tonight is we're actually going to infect the environment that we're looking at right here with the Jigsaw ransomware. We're going to see as that populates to the OneDrive sync client. We're then also going to see how that populates to the OneDrive online client. We're going to delete the data, and then we're going to recover it all in a matter of about 5 minutes here with the Backupify product. Now, to give you a little bit of context, so the way that our systems work, Backupify itself is a SaaS platform. What we're doing for this particular demonstration is we're actually leveraging our parent company's technology called Datto. They do traditional backup VCDR for basically every environment, whether it's Mac, Linux, or Windows OS. So what I've done is I've backed up this Microsoft Windows 7 environment to a Datto. I've actually virtualized this on the device with a virtualized network connection. Don't worry, this is all firewalled. You're not at risk if you're on our Wi-Fi. Don't worry. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to do this, like I said, in real time. So what I've done here is up on the screen, I have that virtualized environment. And this is my OneDrive. As you can see up at the top, live OneDrive, you can see that I have little check marks to indicate that I am, in fact, syncing. And what we're going to do is we are going to go to the desktop here, and we are going to infect ourselves with ransomware. This is the Jigsaw virus. If you ever want to play around with your own ransomware, there's a great GitHub repository called the Zoo. That's where I get all of mine. It allows you to actually download the stuff safely. So I actually went in before this. It's password protected, and it's basically all application type has been removed. So I added exe to make this an application so I can run it. Before we do that, though, really quick, I am just going to show you. So in my live OneDrive on the network, this is that same user. Okay, this is that same data. So if we want to compare just really quick, oops, and I closed it, of course. As you can see, again, same data. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to run Jigsaw. Run. I love that they always pop this up. Your software's been registered. Cool. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to close this window out. We're just going to sit here. It's going to take about a minute or two. But what we're going to see is we're going to see the naming convention on these files change. And for those of you that have never experienced ransomware, that is actually primarily how ransomware works. As you can see, .fun. It's not fun. Trust me. Now, what you'll also notice is that in that short period since it changed, our little sync icon went from syncing to sunk. So we're going to go to the live environment really quick. We're going to just do a quick refresh here. And what we're going to see is that my live OneDrive has also been infected. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Typically, obviously, you're going to quarantine the device. You're going to clean it up. I'm going to leverage the Datto technology to do that. So first thing that I'm going to do here, I am literally just going to go and I'm going to delete all of this OneDrive data. First thing I'm going to do. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to remove this data from my recycle bin as well. So we're going to empty that. Oh, yeah, and then the fun saw face. That's always a fun little thing. So the interesting thing about Jigsaw, I actually did this about a year ago as well for a Google product. The funny thing about Jigsaw is that they pop up this screen, you can't get rid of it. So it's like, I'm trying to go and buy Bitcoin to pay you, but I can't see my screen because you're taking it all up. And this literally takes like 2 minutes. And it basically says, for those of you that don't know, Jigsaw, it's a self-replicating virus, so it is network aware, which is obviously the reason why I'm doing this behind a firewall. But also that this is kind of tricky. If I restart my computer or if I try to change the registry files to get rid of it, it actually starts deleting my files. And after an hour, it actually deletes 1 file, then 6 files, then 12, and so on and so forth. So if you don't do anything, all your data goes away. Now, first, before I close this window out, I also just want to prove that I did just delete all of that data out of OneDrive, and because it is a sync client, all of the data is now gone. It is not in my recycle bin either, so I can't go there to recover it. So this is old stuff. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage the Backupify solution here. I'm going to close this VNC window out, and we're good there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the Backupify solution to recover. Now, one of the things that we've really focused on is building out, first off, complete protection. So tonight we're talking about SharePoint workflows. SharePoint is also susceptible, right? There's a sync client. You can sync that data down locally. Just like OneDrive, it is going to be fully susceptible to the same type of ransomware attack. And when this happens, you want to be able to recover. So what we've done is I've actually logged into the Backupify interface. It's for the account that I've been in. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to dive into this particular user's name is Lawrence of Arabia. I'm going to dive into his account here. And we're going to see, hey, this is all the data that just got deleted. Cool. Now, not only that, I can also go back in time. So let's say that maybe, we've actually seen this happen. Let's say a teacher gets infected with ransomware. And this is always a fun one. Then goes away on summer break 6 weeks later. Oh, by the way, yeah, I was infected. Well, what you're going to be able to do is easily and quickly roll back to any particular point in time. I'm just selecting a date at random here. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to click the restore button. I'm going to leave it at snapshot. I'm going to select Lawrence of Arabia here, and I'm going to click restore. I'm going to pop into this little tab right here. And as you can see, this top one right here, it's already started restoring 4 items. Now, if we pop back into the OneDrive and do a quick little refresh, there's our nice restore folder. And we're starting. And we're going to keep a quick eye on this. Now, this should be done in just a few seconds here. Boom. All my files were just restored in a matter of 24 seconds. And just to make sure that we're on the same page here, I'm just going to do a quick refresh. And dive into this folder. And hey, all my data's back. So basically with this solution, what we just demonstrated is we infected a live environment with ransomware, right? I don't recommend doing that, mind you. But when you do have it happen, and unfortunately is something that will happen all too often and to, unfortunately, the nicest people, what this allows you to do is very, very quickly and very easily recover from that. You don't have to worry about second stage recycle bins. You don't have to worry about PowerShell. All in all, you just saw I just restored all of this data in about 24 seconds. And the app itself takes about 5 minutes to install. So very, very lightweight. It doesn't affect any workflows or anything that you guys are doing in the actual live environment. Very lightweight, but it also does provide full coverage for not just your OneDrive data, but the entire suite within Microsoft. So Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. It gives you that same level of control over that data. So with that basically concludes the presentation. We have Bob here to talk a little bit more about SharePoint workflows. So I do want to give him some time. Before I go, though, are there any questions about anything that we just saw?
Pricing?
Absolutely. I will defer to the 2 sales gentlemen in the back for that one.
I'm guessing it's not free.
No.
But I'm guessing you don't have to pay in Bitcoin.
Correct. That's absolutely a benefit. Absolutely.
Pricing starts at $3 a user per month. It scales down as you have more user count. And that's unlimited storage, support, retention within it. We do not license or charge for shared mailboxes or looking back for help. We follow kind of the Microsoft model.
Well, I have a question. So you restored it cloud to cloud?
Correct.
Right?
Yep. So
how does the security work? Do I have to keep my password in your service all the time, or do I have to? How does the trust work so that you can do that? And
Absolutely.
Constantly be getting the latest copies of the files and all that good stuff.
No, that's a great question, Bob. So the way that Backupify works, it's an OAuth-based authentication app. So Our tool does not require you to put in your password. You install at the global admin level for your tenancy. You authorize us access to a number of scopes. Those scopes are limited to allow us to do what we do, which is backup and restore. Other than that, the tool itself will also automatically refresh that token every 14 days. As we all know, Microsoft has that nice little 14-day timeout. So you don't really ever have to worry about this, and because it's token-based, you don't have to worry about your password changes affecting it in any way either. Cool. Yeah.
You restored it after those have been infected.
Correct.
Right now. Are you developing a software which, because usually ransomware comes, less of an attack. When you click on it, then that's the wrong thing.
Yep.
Are you coming up with a software which, when you click on it, it will immediately send you a red flag saying that file should not be used?
So that's actually something that our hardware products do. So the Datto BCDR solutions have ransomware detection in them. They don't stop you from downloading it, but it will tell you when ransomware has affected you. Our solution is more of a security blanket for when something like that happens, not necessarily a preventative measure like an antivirus software. But that is definitely something that, obviously, the GitHub repository that I mentioned, that's really the purpose of that, is to help organizations like McAfee and Norton build out better security to stop things like ransomware from being from getting in and infecting you, but not something that this solution would protect against, but certainly something it would allow you to recover from.
In your teacher scenario, somebody got it for 3 months. You clearly are not keeping things for an infinite time period.
So I wish I could show you. I really do. I wish I could show you the version where I have more than back to February, but we literally started putting this product out into beta, this particular iteration, back in February.
Sure. What's your intent?
Yes. So our intent is to give you essentially every point that we back up, and we do 3 backups per day. So for this one, it only goes back to April, but I have another environment just like this that goes all the way back to February, and it's 3 points per day every single day or more if I've run additional backups. But the intent is to give you basically a full range, whether it's 1 year, whether it's 7 years, whether it's 10 years, to be able to retain that data and get it back so that in that scenario, again, we've actually had that happen. We were able to get the data back for the teacher. Took a little bit of magic, but we did it. But ultimately, the goal is that you're going to be able to do that directly through the application on your own. So, perfect. Awesome. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and let's get the party started.
So thanks everybody for coming, and wow, thanks for the backup 5 folks for the nicest spread I've ever seen at any user group anywhere. Yeah. Really amazing, you know. Wow. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Let me ask you this. So how many of you have ever used or written a SharePoint workflow? What? About half, maybe, a little bit more. How about Flow, the new Flow product? Hands, same number of hands, but they went higher. I think people were more excited, right? How about Logic Apps? Okay, so basically the intention of this talk is to try to help alleviate some confusion that I've seen a lot of, and try to help choose which one of these various options to use. And because this is kind of a cool environment where we're all sort of at these nice tables and everything, I'd like to invite conversation as well. So if anybody has any comments or additional thoughts, that would be great. And then if somebody wants to, from the remote audience, are there people watching live, or is it just being recorded?
There are live people in the audience.
Okay. I hope there are no dead people in the audience. I hate when that happens. It's like, when I try to do a killer talk, it's not really my intention. But anyway, okay. So if anybody, I can't see the texts probably, but if anybody has a question or a comment, we'll find a way somehow to get that into the mix here.
Yeah, I can take questions
Great.
from the people that are on.
Cool. Thanks. Or comments, because like I said, this is still a developing topic, if you will. In fact, in the cloud, everything changes every 5 minutes, so it's going to change. So I'm going to talk about 3 different workflow engines and the development experiences and architectures that go with them. And then I want to talk about some scenarios that come up, and these are not so much business scenarios. I'm going to assume that we can all kind of figure out how to lay out the logic of one of these, and that really I'm trying to compare the tools. So I wanted to really look at how identity works and permissions. How can we extend the workflow when we hit a brick wall? And this was something that when I used to work with Julie, we would refer to this as somebody hit a brick wall, right? I was using one of those great no-code solutions, and wham! Okay, you need to code or you're not going to get your job done. And so what happens there? And then also talk a little bit about maintainability and lifecycle management of these solutions. And then finally, at the end, try to wrap it up and give a little bit of guidance on how to choose which one of the workflow engines that are available to you in SharePoint is best for the job. Now, as we go, I'm going to sort of refer to this thing that I call the customization continuum, but I didn't really come up with it. This is really Dave Feldman and DRC Hess who at least I stole the slide from, and I think they came up with the idea. So you've kind of got this spectrum of different ways that you can build these things. So you've got configure is, I'm just going to go in and configure it a little bit. I don't necessarily have to have a ton. It's probably I'm a power user. I'm not a professional developer. I might be a professional developer who happens to be doing it. But in other words, the skills are not hugely demanding. Customize, where it's kind of a light developer experience. And, a lot of times people say, well, it's no code. Yeah, but it can be pretty complicated. So I think a lot of these things count as being pretty technical, even if you're not getting syntax errors as you're typing. Extend, so taking it a step and building outside of what the vendor gave you. And then finally customizing, where you're going to have a complete custom solution. And those last two categories are probably for a regular developer to do. And if you look at these, and by the way, I'm only considering the Microsoft workflows here, so I have to give a tip of the hat to some vendors out there who, like Intex and K2, and there are others who have these products in market, and it's just too many to cover it all. So I'm really just focusing on the Microsoft offerings. So an observation is that if you're on this end of the spectrum towards configure, it's a little bit harder to test it outside of production. Usually you're working right in the production environment. And there's really no such thing as source control. So if you didn't have Backupify and your workflow got wiped out, I don't know if you guys restore workflows, but what do you do then, right? If you had source control, you would just reinstall it. If you didn't, you might have to rebuild it. On the custom side, as you get there, you've got a nice application lifecycle management, release control, and the ability maybe ultimately to do continuous integration and deployment where everything's kind of managed. So you'll see these little diagrams like this throughout the talk as I'm just sort of trying to classify which ones of these tools is which. And I would say that one of the selection criteria is going to be, where do you stand? You don't have to answer this, but just which ones of these do you feel comfortable with, or which ones of these do you have somebody on your team who can do? Because if something says, hey, this is a blue customized type task, and you don't have anybody who's got that skill set, maybe you're going to not do that method. Does that make sense? All right. So let's look at the three Microsoft workflow engines. And I kind of look at it like this, right? So I've got the SharePoint 2010 workflow engine. That's like the old tractor that just keeps on working. And, probably the majority of workflows live right now in Office 365 or in SharePoint Online are still using that old workflow engine. Believe it or not, that old thing still works. It's a little noisy and smelly, but you know what? It works. In fact, it's one of the more powerful options. Then in 2013, they came out with a new workflow engine, and it's nice and shiny and polished. But you notice it's kind of like in a museum. But not that many people are really using it, right? It's there. It's really nice. It has some nice features, but it's a little bit more academic. People aren't really using it. And then we've got Flow, and it's really powerful, and that's actually a jet engine in the picture. So it's headed for the clouds, except for one thing. The mechanic is still working on it. It's not done yet. All right?
Nice. Very nice.
All right. So that's where we are. We're trying to choose between these three things. And, we'll get to the end and kind of take stock in which one you want to hitch your wagon to. So to kind of look at these things in review, we have the SharePoint 2010 workflows. And there are three ways you can manage them. And notice that they've got the whole spectrum of that customization thing are lit up. So I've got the old, I could bring this to the front if you want, but I just figured everybody's probably seen it a million times. You say you want to go in and create an approval or get some feedback, and you just fill in a nice little form, and you say who's going to approve it, what are the rules, is this, if you have more than one approver, are they going to go in sequence or at the same time, how much time do they have to approve it, and you click a few buttons, and you're good to go. That's we call it configuration, and I absolutely love it. And probably the reason why this old workflow is still the most popular is because most of them are that out-of-the-box workflow. And nobody since then has ever provided an out-of-the-box workflow. Everything else requires at least some customization. So then here I've got in the middle SharePoint Designer, And for old time's sake, this is really SharePoint Designer 2010. I could have used 2007. I couldn't get my VM working because that is how old this is. It really did come out in 2007, so everybody calls it the 2010 workflow. It's really the 2007 workflow. Yes, it's 10 years old. And so it looks kind of like an Outlook rule, right? And so, well, you know, it's nice, it's kind of easy, but the amount of complexity of logic that you can do is a little bit limited. And then here at the full custom, oh, and you can extend it by writing custom actions. But I'm not going to talk about that because Microsoft has shut that off. There's no way to do that in SharePoint Online anymore. On-prem, you can do a farm solution. You used to be able to do a sandbox solution, but Microsoft has shut those off. So there's really no way to extend it anymore. And then here's the full custom workflow, which is really not worth talking about very much because you can't do that online either. Plus, you kind of had to be a rocket scientist to make it work. I knew some really, really, really smart people, and I used to work at Microsoft, and we had a lab. We do proof of concepts, and if we had to do one of these, it was like somebody go in the back room and just tear your hair out for a week just to get it to work. It was, I don't know if anybody has tried this or if anybody says, oh, no, it was easy, I did it, no problem. And it's like, okay, dependency objects. Let's talk about dependency objects. So the way this thing worked was that you actually had this thing called the Workflow Foundation, which came from a different group than SharePoint. And Workflow Foundation was a runtime. And then you had these different hosting providers. So SharePoint, as a hosting, that workflow engine, had to provide things like saving the state of the workflow, starting a workflow, notifying that something happened, different roles you can modify it, things like that. They had to provide all these little providers. And then you could feed your XAML in here. The file name ends in XOML, but they call it really is XAML. It's just that they didn't want it to conflict with the WPF use of that word. You come in with SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio, create your XML definition, and feed that in, and now you could go ahead and run the workflow. So there were a lot of built-in triggers and activities, and you used to be able to, or on-prem, you still can build your custom activities. So that's what that thing is, and you know what? It's really popular, and it's still very, very useful. Then we have the SharePoint 2013 workflows. Nothing built in. They have an approval task, but it's just like, hey, do you approve? And then I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to tell the workflow whether you approved or not. Oh, by the way, there was no action built in that would actually approve an item in SharePoint. So if you wanted to do an approval and then have it actually, approve a document, sorry, you can't do that, right? I will show how you could extend it. So you could have done it with web services, but it would be really tricky. And then you had, and actually this was my favorite for a long time. So be careful when you listen to me because I do my best to try to figure out what's future-proof. 2 years ago, I thought this was the way to go. And I'm going to change my mind now. But, this is Visual Studio, and I'm doing a workflow in 2013 workflow. And it's a beautiful environment. Much less confusing, I thought, than SharePoint Designer. And you can put little code expressions in there. And unlike SharePoint Designer, it doesn't go and create variables left and right, all called the same thing. And then you have to constantly jump on them and try to rename them. I don't know if anybody, so that you can figure out what, field 872 is or something like that. I know I can see a couple people have been through this pain, but if you haven't, then hopefully you won't have to go back to this stuff. But anyway, they solved all that. It was just a beautiful thing. You could put, I forgot to mention this, but on all of these, you could package your info path forms right in there. Info what? Info path was the forms environment. So anyway, this is pretty cool stuff, and this just outputs XAML. This will still work. It's just that it's kind of like that museum piece. I start to wonder, what is Microsoft going to keep, and what are they going to throw away? I don't have any inside information on this at all, and I think maybe they got the memo that a lot of us were getting upset that they were deprecating things faster than they were adding new ones for about a year ago. So, but I got to just wonder, Microsoft has telemetry throughout Office 365. So when they try to look at what features to enhance or what features to phase out, one of the things they do is they look to see how many people are using that feature. Let me give you a hint. You don't want to be the person 1 out of 1 million people who is using a certain feature. You kind of want to go with the mainstream on this stuff. So just a thought. So even though I like this, it's kind of dated at this point. And what they did here was they actually moved workflow out of SharePoint. Workflow Manager was originally called Azure Workflow Manager. So you could tell they were trying to be cloud ready here, and everything works with web services. So you'd have your triggers and your activities here in SharePoint. You had an object model. Your XAML came into SharePoint, and then it talked with the Workflow Manager farm. You could have a whole farm of these servers using REST services. And then, wow, Workflow Manager actually persisted the workflow and remembered the state. SharePoint didn't have to do all that stuff. So it was a better architecture, but somehow it's sort of a snapshot in time. We're still at Workflow Manager 1.0. I think they did a small update. So it is what it is. Now we have Microsoft Flow. And
Can I ask a question?
yeah, please.
My personal curiosity is anything else.
Yeah.
There is a Visio 2010 SharePoint workflow template and one for
Oh.
2013 and 2016 as well. Has anyone ever actually used them? Okay. Yeah, the intent was you could visually lay out the workflow, and then you had to go into SharePoint Designer and finish it, like do all the work.
Yeah.
It demoed really well. It demoed really well. Okay.
It demoed well, yeah. I was
That's
going to
kind of what I
say.
thought. I don't have any customers who've actually ever used it. I was just curious. I saw so many hands of SharePoint developers.
Yeah, I never had anybody. It demoed well. What I really liked was in the old SharePoint 2010 workflows, you could connect to Visio services and see the workflow run.
Yes, yeah.
In a little Visio. That was really cool.
Yeah.
The design thing, okay, slight aside, but you got me started.
I can retract my question.
Sorry, I'll be quick, but just a bunch of my friends and I were all talking about the fact that the SharePoint framework, which we all will use, seems to be nudging us all towards this library called React. And a lot of us really like other libraries called like Angular or Knockout. And one of the big differences is that React mixes the HTML into the JavaScript, and those other ones, they break the JavaScript out into separate from the HTML. And one of the arguments for this is that you could take the HTML and give it to your colleague, who could then update the HTML and not mess your code, right? And I can't find a single person who ever used it. It seems like you always have either the artist or the production engineer is competent enough to not break the code, or it might actually be the same person who's writing the code. So, I don't know. So I think it was one of those scenarios where they thought, oh, we'll give the business people this and the other people that, and then there's this whole mashing it together stage that makes it more work than it was work.
Okay. But thank you. It corroborates what I expected.
But anyway, that's my theory on it. Okay, so then we got Microsoft Flow. Really cool, nice design experience. The only kind of downside is there are only 4 triggers in SharePoint and a pretty small set of actions you can do. So I think that's kind of the downside. The upside is it works everywhere. It works on all of the Office 365 properties. It works in Exchange. It works in Yammer. It works with Excel, and you can parse spreadsheets. You can get to databases. You can get to Slack and Twitter and Todoist and all these cloud services. There are hundreds of cloud services. So that's the really cool thing is it works across site collections in SharePoint. It works across cloud services. The downside is that they've only done the most primitive, simple little actions in SharePoint. So if you really want to do something rich in SharePoint, you were pretty limited. Now, this is actually part of a bigger ecosystem, and I don't think a lot of people know about this. This whole thing was, a lot of this was announced last summer at a Dynamics 365 event. And really, there's a whole, what this is it's part of the applications platform. So those of us who have been in the SharePoint community for a while knew about this idea of composite applications, where you're building an application on top of SharePoint using things like InfoPath and SharePoint workflows. It was a really good idea, but limiting it to just SharePoint maybe didn't make sense. So this is the new approach, is that they've got Power BI, Power Apps, and Flow here as sort of power user tools, and then they've got the developers and IT pros, and they don't really tell us what the tools are, but I can tell you that this one right here is Logic Apps, Azure Logic Apps, which I'm going to do a quick demo of today. And then behind that is a common connector and gateway model. So all these connectors, and believe me, I got tired of copying and pasting icons. There are hundreds, right? All these connectors work across all of these technologies, and also gateways into, say, your on-prem environment, and I'll demo that as well. There's also a common data model, which is something, has anybody played with the common data model? Okay, I'm not the only one. I'm chomping at the bit to get into it. So think about this, right? SharePoint simulates like a database inside of a database, right? So you don't need a DBA, but you're going to go in there and create lists and columns and stuff like that, right? And then some of the people in the room I know how that works under the covers, and there's really a huge amount of junk that has to happen to make that work in SQL Server. And as a result, we get weird things like 5,000 item limits in SharePoint, which I guess now they announced on Tuesday that they're going to have a machine learning layer or service that runs around and puts indexes on it so that you can go beyond 5,000 items, which I thought was a really interesting approach. But it's kind of like, if I had a little robot that if I had a leaky dam and holes are springing on, I had a little robot that just went and put bubble gum in each leak. It's like okay, I guess that works. But I don't know if I'm going to buy a house right next to it, I mean, just saying. Upstream, yeah. Exactly. But anyway, so common data model is like a real database. It's a real relational database, and they've tried to make a generic business schema to it. And it's all aligned around Dynamics CRM and Dynamics ERP. So it has things like customers and products. And so I'm kind of interested in playing around with that. And I think that, and there are connectors for that from Flow and Logic Apps. So I think that's going to be an interesting area to kind of see evolve, because I think it's going to empower more serious applications to be built with the ease that you would use these other tools. But we'll see. All right. And it's also a sign that not only is Yammer not dead, but Dynamics 365, CRM and ERP are not dead either. Microsoft's making a renewed set of investments. Let me ask this: does the Office 365 user group ever do anything with Dynamics? Never yet? Okay. Well, that will be I'll be watching for that, right? That will be maybe I'll learn enough to come and talk about it someday. I'm just trying to come up to speed on it right now. But it's actually really cool stuff, and it's one of those sort of neglected stepchildren of Microsoft that I think is about to make a comeback. All right. So I want to do a demo now of connectors and gateways. I'm not going to do any really big, hairy, complex workflows. You can kind of do those, and I think the thing is that I find at a talk like this, it's just going to get confusing if I go too crazy. So everything is kind of broken down into kind of the core of a concept. And so this first one is about connectors and the on-premises gateway. Now, before I recorded this demo, and you're going to see my demos, I'm jumping all over the place, so there's no way I could do them all live because I've got like 3 or 4 different environments. Before I did this, I actually took an on-prem SharePoint 2016 server, and then I had a second VM where I put installed this little thing called the on-premises data gateway. So I downloaded this. It's a free download from Microsoft. And when I installed it, I should have probably captured the installation. It's kind of V1 software. Mark, what do you think about the 3-year product life cycle? And can I pick on you? I think this is so brilliant. I would quote you if you weren't here. But you're here. So I would rather he's going to deny. I think it's brilliant. Microsoft is still on a 3-year cycle with their products.
3-year product cycle. Where you just get to play with the toys more.
That's better said than I would have tried to quote it. But yes. So you can install this, but you can't really uninstall it. And once it gets registered in Azure, there's no supported way to unregister it. So, it demos well, it works pretty well. But it's not really finished, because until you can take it away. Anyway, you can't really enumerate them. So anyway, I installed that thing, and when I installed it, a little pop-up came up, and it made me log in as an Azure administrator, and it put something into my Azure that said there's a data gateway and here it is, right? And one of the cool things about it is I didn't have to open up my firewall. So I was at home where I've got a network address translation style firewall. It's one way. Calls can go out, they can't come in, and it still works. So this is really inviting that under-the-desk scenario that made SharePoint famous in the first place, because literally, for better or worse, you could install this on your desk at work, probably, and unless somebody in IT was watching for it, you could actually start to go and connect Flow and Power Apps into your on-premises environment. This is all stuff that you can do without an administrator. A lot of it is. So I had to be an Azure admin, so I guess I had to have that much. So now I'm in Azure, and I need to kind of define the other half of it. So when I installed it, all that did was remember that I had a client with a certain name, and it's going to call out, because only the outgoing connections through the firewall, right? It's going to call out and say, hey, I'm here every so often, and keep everything in sync. All right, so now I'm here in Azure, and what I'm going to do is create a new gateway. I have to register the gateway on the inside of Azure, because I've done it on the outside of Azure. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. And I'm going to use an existing resource group. If you don't know what a resource group is, it's a group of, I'm trying to not say the word resource, it's a group of things in Azure that go together that you can manage as a unit. So you can bill for them, you can see the cost as a unit, you can give administrative control as a unit. So I had to connect it to a resource group. I had to give it a name, and I click a button, and deployment in progress, and any second now, hey, the deployment succeeded. That's another advantage of the video approach. I'm pretty sure my demos aren't going to break. All right. One of them, I had to do a lot of retakes. I'll admit that when I come to it. So, huh?
Don't tell us it's not live.
Oh. Oh, okay. Well, whatever.
We didn't know.
You knew. You know.
We didn't know.
You know everything. So, I don't care. Whatever. So anyway, yeah, exactly. So now I'm going to go into Flow, and you'll see that it's created this gateway for me, with that same name. So now I'm going to go ahead and use that, and what I can do is go into the regular SharePoint connector. So I'm going to go in and make a new connection, and now notice that I already had a SharePoint connection there. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm going to make a second one here. And there's this little checkbox, connect to on-premises data gateway. Now you won't see this unless you have configured a data gateway. So the first one, when I connected to my SharePoint Online environment, I didn't get this little checkbox. Now I have a data gateway, so it's going to give me the chance to connect using the data gateway. So, okay, I'll go ahead and do that. And I'm going to say authentication type. Now, the gateway is kind of like a proxy server. So I'm literally typing my on-premises username and password in here into Azure, and it's going to get stored, hopefully securely. And wait a second, and bang, there it is. So now I have two SharePoints. I've got my on-prem one and my cloud-based one. So now I'm going to go ahead and use the on-prem one. And yep, so it's there. That's cool. So now I'm going to go and make a new flow. Go to my flows. And make a new one, type SharePoint, and I click SharePoint. When a file is created, it's going to trigger my workflow, my flow. And notice that here, under the three dots, this is something you have to pay attention to in Flow, right? It's got my two connections. I could have 20 of these. I could connect your cloud to your cloud. I could do it, no problem. So those are my two connections. So I want to make sure that I'm talking to the on-prem connection. And now I could also use those to connect as different users, because you can see that the user identity is right in there. So now I'm going to go ahead and put in my URL. This is the caveat with the on-premises gateway with SharePoint in specific. Right now it is HTTP only. So I could not use HTTPS. I'm hoping that they fix that. Now, it doesn't mean the data is not encrypted as it goes in and out of the gateway, but from, between the cloud and the gateway is encrypted by the gateway. But between the gateway and SharePoint, it's going to relay all these messages. That right now can't be encrypted.
You can't browse this. You have to remember the.
Yeah, you can't browse. You got to remember the exact URL. Yep. That's right. But it does come up. You can browse the lists now that it's connected. I can tell already it's connected because it's giving me a list of the libraries inside of my SharePoint on-prem. And this is exactly what they are. So that's cool. So now I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to pick the other kind of stepchild here, Yammer, and I'm going to post a message about my new file in Yammer. And again, so this is kind of the way these connectors work. They're pretty cool. You guys configure each one. So I get to say what group, and I'm going to compose my message here. So I can say, check out this new document on premises, and then I'll put the file path in there. And that's good enough. I'm not trying to keep it simple here. So, okay, it's done. Yay, everybody's happy. My new flow is running. So let's make sure it works. So I'm going to go to my on-premises. There I can see it's working. I'm going to go to my on-premises environment now. And go to my document library. And there's nothing in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put a sample document. I have some demo documents here, so I'll pick one out and drag it into the document library. All right. And if I go back to my flow, the way you check on one of these is that you click the little I, and I can see the runs of the flow, and I can see, hey, look, it's running right now. Wow. And if I click refresh, it succeeded. Yay. So now let me go to my Yammer site, and lo and behold, there it is. There's a message that says check out the new document on premises, and it's got the URL sort of. Question? Well, I say sort of because Yammer didn't notice that it was the URL. I can't click on it. And so that's something that I'm going to fix over the next couple of demos is just that simple thing. But it shows how easy it is to hit a brick wall, because I really don't think there is a way out of the box by just clicking on shapes that I could make that be a clickable link. Okay, the reason it's not clickable is because Yammer has a rule that it has to start with HTTP or HTTPS, and if it has a space in it, it's gonna break it in the middle.
Couldn't you use there's the text parsing thing, which I use to figure out how to make a query against the SharePoint lists in Flow?
Yes, you can. There's a composition action.
Right. So you could take
use
that and say, click that on the front.
Yes, you
make
could.
Make %27s out of all your spaces.
Exactly. So that's one way, and then I'm going to show another way, which is an Azure function, which gives you your way is lighter weight and faster, but it requires you to learn that word syntax. And the other way I'm going to show mainly because you can do 1,000 other things with it, and which is an Azure function, so you can actually have a little piece of JavaScript or C# that does something useful. But yes, absolutely you could do that. But there's no, if you're the power user, you're probably going to say, how come I can't click the link?
Then you're Googling it.
Exactly. Mark, did you have a?
You just ran a flow on a list that was not a modern list.
Correct.
Using classic views.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the list is modern or not. So there's a little modern, in the modern list, there's a little button for flow, which creates a new flow based on that list. But the data itself, it doesn't really depend on the modern UI at all.
I found, though, when I'm in flow and I specify the site and I look at the libraries that are available, or list of libraries, anything that's in classic mode isn't there. So I can type it in, but then it doesn't run.
Okay, I didn't. That's interesting because I didn't find that.
It didn't make sense.
Any other comments on that? Or anybody else have any experience on that? Because I actually, even in SharePoint Online, even in SharePoint Online, I was using, well, okay, I probably had modern. Everything was the lists were probably all modern because
I'm wondering if
I would have had to go out of my way to turn it off.
I'm wondering if your gateway is the thing that makes it okay.
It's probably either the gateway or Microsoft is trying to push us over to modern, and so they
That's what we were.
Yeah. So but under the covers, these things are always based on either an event or polling. This one, as we'll see later, is based on polling. So it's going to check every 5 minutes or something. So you know as well as I do, the API is the same for getting at the list. So I don't think it should matter, but I believe you when you say that you had that experience. So I'll look into that. Thanks.
Yeah, on a recent project, we created a flow on top of the list, and afterwards we changed the list to classic because it doesn't too much functionality. The flow continues to work. Yeah. So we never tried to really extract that.
Yeah, which is why I suspect that maybe in order to encourage everyone to go to modern lists, they maybe did that at the design level
Maybe
and just made it so.
the webhooks are turned on. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, but there's that why it doesn't work. So
Yeah. That's a really good question. All right. Okay, so the next thing, so that's just sort of the basic of connectors and the gateway. So now let's go into talking about identities, and I'm going to talk about this in all three of the workflow engines, and I'm going to make a little game out of it. So I'm going to stop the demo and then ask everybody to tell me how the story is going to end in each case. Okay? So we're going to start in SharePoint 2010. And I'm going to come in here and I've got a workflow. You can see that this workflow this is where everybody knows that it's a video because it just, I just walked away by mistake, almost tripped over the cord, and it's still happening. Let me try again, okay? All right, so this is based on a list called source, and it's set to automatically start when an item is created. And again, it's a really simple one to just show the point. All it does is copy the current item to another list called destination. Then I got this thing called an impersonation step, which is going to copy from the current item to the destination. By the way, that old SharePoint 2010, old trusty, rusty tractor in the back is the only one of these options that has a copy list item. Who would want to copy a list item? Gee. It's the only one that has it, okay? So what can I say? You'll see how I had to do it in the other ones. It wasn't too bad. So now I'm going to go into, and notice that I'm logged in as me, and I'm going to publish the workflow. Now, here I am, and this time I'm logged in as Kelly Rollin. And I'm going to go into the source list, and I'm going to make a new item called Test SP2010, and I'm going to click Save. Okay, and now before I switch to the destination list, who can tell me what I'm going to see in the destination list other than Julie, who I know knows everything?
really won't be in that list.
No, okay. Maybe Julie. Sorry, Julie. She's going to walk away, dejected now, and get another bottle of champagne. So, maybe I should let Julie.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. It's fine. Have water.
What's going to be in the destination list? Nothing is one option. Okay, Julie, what's going to be in the destination list?
No, I'm not answering.
A copy with the system ID.
A copy with
System account.
system account. Okay, yeah, this was a. So the answer is there's going to be two copies. I copied it twice, and one of them is Kelly, and the other one's me. I used it in person, and I knew Julie knew it. You didn't have to show off how smart you are because I already know. So the first copy executed as me because the first copy executed as Kelly because by default in SharePoint workflow you're acting as the user who initiated the workflow, and the second one ran as me because I published the workflow. So that's kind of cool. I mean, I have a couple of options. The only problem is, what if I leave the company and they take away my permissions and there's 100 list items that have my name on them as the creator, and I guess the permissions don't break, but it's still a little. The workflow would break. Yeah.
Well, it would do the first step and not the second.
Correct. Exactly. Let's try another one. This is the 2013 style workflow. Same setup. I've got a list called source. And this time, instead of an impersonation step, I have an app step. So once again, because they don't have impersonation steps in 2013, they have app steps. The reason for that is because the SharePoint 23 workflow, whatever I just said, I was wrong, with the 2013 workflow, is based on the app model, now called the add-in model. So they used the same security system that they use for Microsoft, for SharePoint add-ins. So now I'm going to go in, and again, I'm logged in as Kelly, and I'm going to create a new item, SP 2013 test. Okay, and now when I click on destination, what's going to be in there? You know it. Because you said it last time. Somebody said it last time. What's going to be in there?
One a copy from the system account.
I think you're right. Let's try. So I'm going to go in and go to the destination, and yes, it's the SharePoint app. So it's essentially a system account. This is actually the SharePoint app identity. The entire workflow system runs under the identity of this app. And then the one that wasn't in the app step has Kelly's own name on it. What's interesting about this is if I wanted to change the permissions for Kelly, we all know how to do that. If I wanted to change the permissions for this app, right? Like I once wrote, I'll show you later an example where I have a workflow that creates a site. Well, the app doesn't have enough permission by default to create the site. So you have to do this weird hack, which I'm not going to show, where you go in to the app registration page, you go in and you find the GUID of that app ID, and you build the URL of that you would use to consent to an application install, but you paste that URL into the middle, that GUID into the middle, in order to grant that app more permissions inside of a site collection. So it's a little weird, and the downside of it, I think, is that if you do that in a site collection, now every workflow inside of that site collection, the app step has more permission. So I can't just give one workflow permission. I have to give all the workflows the permission. Now here's the clincher. I'm here in Flow, and I'm logged in as me. You can see my smiling face. It's almost 3 pixels wide there. And I have almost the same thing. When an item is created, create an item. So when an item is created, in the source list, create an item, and I had to manually copy the title, which I actually did in the 2013 one too. I didn't point that out. Now I'm logged in as Katie Jordan because I don't have a Kelly Rollin in my cloud environment. But I'm logged in as Katie, and I go, oh boy, a modern form and everything. Type this in, my flow test. All right. Now what's going to be in the destination? I only copied it once. As usual, Ms. Turner is correct. You can tell we used to work together. Okay, so there, yeah. So now, all right, well, what if I want to get around this? Tell you what. I'm going to let's fix that problem we were talking about before where if I left the company, my workflow would break, right? And because not only would my workflow break, but I'm gone. Nobody knows my password. My account's been disabled. So how the heck are you going to go in and fix it, right? So I'm going to do something that I think is very wise for you to do. I'm going to click on the 2 little heads and add another owner. So this makes it a team flow. So now I can go in and add other people. And I'm going to add my friend Katie to this so that she can also manage this workflow. Now there's a little hint here, which is the embedded connection. Still has my name on it. I mean, it's kind of clever, right, that the connections embed the credentials that they need to actually connect. So if I come in here and add an item, after sharing, I click Save. Now I go to the destination, and son of a gun, well, that's the old one. This can actually take 5 or 10 minutes to run, so that's another reason to, hey, look, it's still me. You can't get away from me. So this is the crazy thing about flow, and one of the considerations when you're choosing a technology, unless somebody else has input, which I'm looking for actually, I don't think there's a real easy way to run as the user. You're always going to run as the user who provisioned the flow.
So Mark and I were actually having this conversation, and I know it's not there yet, but the conversation that we're having around this is about creating flows for a performance review system. And this very thing, I do not want to establish all these complex flows under a user and thinking sort of in our old days, we would never build a system that didn't run under a service account. So I added an Office 365 user that I called Performance Review System, and I'm running everything under that system account. But the problem, as I see it, is really the license. Yeah, exactly. And it's to my mind, that's like you should be able to create service level Azure accounts without having to pay. But that.
I agree. I agree completely. I maybe there's a Dear Microsoft letter coming.
What did you have to decide on the license?
Well, I just picked one of my licenses. Yeah, it was whatever I got.
I think the answer is it depends on what it does. But anything that it's going to do, you have to license.
It had to have access to SharePoint.
The system isn't going to know the difference. So
right, it had to have access to SharePoint.
Really, you should probably need to get a SharePoint Online license.
That's my point. Yes.
Correct. But most of us have an E3 or an E5 or an E1 or something.
But at the same time, I mean, right, in this case, it's going to send email notifications. So I kind of like that the email notifications that are going out are performance review system, and that kind of looks nice. So the fact that I had to give it a full-blown E3, meaning it had mailbox and everything, seems okay. But at the same time, it doesn't need.
You probably do need one, but still.
What's the point being is whatever the client or your organization has for licenses is pretty much what you have available to you. It's going to be whatever it is. And having to spend X amount of, I mean, I guess it makes, at the very least, maybe throw one user license at all the flows that you're going to use in your whole organization at the very least.
Yeah, but
it's awkward if one is both, or you call it performance review, and then later you add another.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could call it system, but the problem with that point, is that now I'm like doing things where I'm putting things in lists and whatever, and now I've had to give that user
exactly what I was going to say. And now I want to set up the softball league, and I want to hand the softball league service account to somebody who's going to manage the softball league, and they have access to all the performance reviews. Right. Oh, great idea! Yeah, it's a pain, and on-prem we didn't have that problem, right? Microsoft didn't count service accounts as needing a license, so at least we should probably put out a user voice on this.
Yeah.
Isn't it also true that when you created these flows, you can't remove yourself? You could remove Katie.
You're right.
But you can't.
I could remove myself from the flow, but I can't remove myself from the connector. Right. And that's the weird part. So if I have to trust, in order to share this flow with Katie, I have to really kind of trust Katie. Because Katie could take that connection and add 27 more actions, and they're all going to run as me. Right. Because my credentials are inside of that connector.
Yeah, well, and she can make it do things that are...
So she could make it, if I had a connector to email as me, she could start sending out emails that would look exactly like they came from me. She could make a new flow, connect to that connector, and start sending nastygrams to the president of the company.
This is that enterprise class security that Microsoft is always talking about, right?
Yeah. All right. So,
different topics of service accounts. When you say the applies for test accounts, you're building a really complicated workflow that has multiple different roles that improve different stages. You still want some test accounts to test the workflow in production, right? And now you have to assign at least SharePoint and one license to each of them. It's not the best.
It's an expensive proposition.
It's true. It's true, especially in the smaller your org, the more expensive, virtually, because if I have 50,000 users, 50,001 isn't that much as a percentage, but if I have 5 users, that's a big percentage. All right, so now the next question is, And we've all had this experience, right? You're working on your flow or your workflow or whatever it might be, or you're working on your info path form or your Power App. Any of these tools are all so powerful. They all demo really well. And then all of a sudden you're like, I want to do the simplest thing, and it won't let me. What do I do? So I kind of wanted to consider how we would deal with that on all these workflows. And one of the things I did was I found this cool article called 7 Problems You Will Encounter When Using Microsoft Flow, and I think I especially like the little 365 monster guy here. So here they are. I pulled them out of the article. The workarounds that were here, not criticizing the author at all, it's a very well-written article. The workarounds were kind of sad, though, because a lot of them were like, okay, we just decided not to do that. They didn't, So I'm gonna address these and see how we could work around them, but it's going to be a different kind of answer where you need to bring in more skills. So the first 3 are really because they're missing actions, right? So you can't copy into a person field. So you got that neat create list item, but if there's a person field, you ain't going to be populating that. So the workaround there was to just use a text field, right? In the article, if I remember. Or a person field with multiple selections, multiple lines of text in an email. They decided, okay, we'll just have 1 line of text in our email and let it wrap. Outlook approval email. So it's interesting, the way approvals work in Flow, it's actually an Outlook, which is an end user name for Exchange, right? It's actually an Outlook action that you use. And all it does is it sends somebody an email, and then it has buttons in it for approve or reject, and then it comes back and wakes up the flow, and you have access to what they answered. But they found, so that's why, right, unless there's another action that says actually approve a list item or a document or something, you can't really use it the way you would use the 2010 workflows to do an approval. The good news is that they announced yesterday that this summer they are going to have a real SharePoint approval workflow in Flow, which is going to be able to update the list item and approve it. Love it.
You said summer?
They said this summer. So they had some problems formatting the email. It turned out that if you want HTML to work, you have to put a hyperlink somewhere in your email, and then all of a sudden it'll say, oh, this has HTML in it. You can start using other HTML elements. Capturing information from an approval email, there's no way to do it. So if you had done this with in an earlier version, even in 2013, you could actually, it got connected to a SharePoint task, a workflow task. You could add new columns to the workflow task, and those would appear on the form. So I could, if I wanted to say approve it and here, give me some comments, I could just make a comments field and it would show up there in the task and the reviewer would type their comments, right? You can't do that here because this is completely disconnected. There really is no task. As a matter of fact, if that email goes into my junk mail folder, that's the end of the workflow. It's going to sit there forever. So it is what it is, but that's where that is. So I'm hoping that the new workflow task solves that, or the new approval workflow solves that. These last 2 are really about that situation I was talking about at the beginning, where if you do the kind of power user approach to things, a lot of times there's really no way to manage it. So when they had to move the flow to a new site or a new list, they basically had to recreate the entire flow by hand. So, you can test it, but you better not make a mistake when you're doing 1,000 clicks to create it in production, right? So I don't have solutions for all these, but I have approaches to the first 3 of like what happens if there's a missing action, and I have an approach for the last 2, which is what happens if you want to actually manage this. Look, I love the idea that a power user, and I use this too, I can set up a little flow just sort of as my own little bot that does cool things for me, right? And it's great that you can do that, and that doesn't have to be enterprise scale. But a lot of times these things grow. I love the citizen developer because the citizen developers are the closest people into the business. They know better than I do as a developer what really needs to be done. And they're going to experiment, iterate, and make that solution better and better and better because they're embedded in the team that uses it. A developer can't do that. Long live the citizen developer.
Good developer.
A good developer can do that. I could do that, but I usually don't have time. I mean, usually people don't want to pay me to live in their, Because I'm sure you've seen this, right? The guy or the gal who came up with this cool idea, they're sitting at lunch with their friends. Wouldn't it be cool if you did this? And then they go back and put it in after lunch, and that goes on forever. That's really awesome. So there's actually an approach here where we can promote these things once they become so important that they're mission critical to being more enterprise solutions as a logic app. All right, so let's look at extending the workflow. I'm going to start with 2013 workflow. How are we doing on time, by the way? Doing okay? All right. So this is that site creation workflow. And so basically, come on. So the way this works is I'm going to go and create a new item in this list. Or not. Come on, folks. This is weird. Doesn't want to go forward. All right. You didn't really want, I don't know if you really want to go into that. I was almost going to skip it anyway, and now the video doesn't want to play. It's kind of weird because, okay, so I could call a web service. Basically what this thing shows. Weird, I've never had this happen before. Okay, that's what I get for being glib and saying my demos wouldn't break. I have angered the demo gods now. The video will not play. And the weird thing is I obviously ran through all these before. I hope the next one works because this one's important. So this is how I would approach it potentially from Flow. So here I am, and I've got my broken URL. Remember the broken URL? Yay, it's working. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to create an Azure function. So I have to go into Azure. And I think this is really cool. So I'm literally going to create a new one right now. And there are all these little templates, just like there would be for Flow. And I'm going to pick one that is an HTTP trigger that is written in JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, I chose this because a lot of people know JavaScript from the web browser. So I can run it in an Azure function as well. So this is just going to be called getDocURL. And this is what I get. So I get a little piece of JavaScript, and I'm just going to replace it with my JavaScript. It looks almost the same. So I'm going to get in the site URL and the path because the SharePoint trigger gave me the path name. I had to put in the site URL, and I'm just going to concatenate from here. Okay, and then I'll fix the error message in case it doesn't work, but whatever. Okay, now I'll go ahead and save that. Now let's test it. So I'll come over here to the test area, and I'm going to add two query string parameters. One is called the site URL, and I'll just input the test data that I'm going to use. It doesn't have to be a real host name, I'm just testing. And then I'm going to put the path, and I'll put a little test path that looks just like the one that I saw before. Okay, and then I can run that. And what I should get out the other end is the concatenation, right? So that works, and it's not, rocket science. It's pretty easy. It's pretty light. I think it's light programming because I'm able to do it in JavaScript. If I knew the browser, I'm typing it right into the web browser. I don't need any special tools or anything like that. So now if I want to use this from Flow, then I'm going to have to do a couple of things. So one is I really only want to do, I'm going to simplify this a little bit. So I don't really need all these different HTTP verbs. So if you know anything about RESTful services, the idea of a RESTful service is that it uses just normal HTTP, just like a web browser would use. It stands for Representational Entity State Frame, Entity, REST, Representative. I know it. Why did I try to do this? Representational Entity State Transfer. I just wanted to do that so I could prove that I knew what I was talking about, and I probably proved something else. But anyway, here's my. I really don't need. Normally, I could convey different kinds of actions on the entity, with the different HTTP verbs, but I'm just going to do the get, because all I want to do is get back that result. And so I'm going to make that change, and then I'm going to come in here, and I'm actually going to take the security key. So this is done on a function by function basis, and for convenience I want to use the same connector to all these functions. You'll notice that, so I'm going to go ahead and copy it in here and make it so that I can use that key on all of my functions. So this whole thing, this whole little collection of functions is called flow helpers. So that's called a function app. It's like a group of functions. And so, I'm sort of collecting these up. These are just different little utility functions, and I wanted them all to be able to connect in the same way. Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Now I could, if I wanted to connect to each one differently, I could, but this allows me to use one connection for all of them. Now I'm going to go ahead and click the API definition, which is still in preview. And what this is going to do, it's going to create something called a swagger. So swagger is either what happens like after we've been drinking at night, or it's a JSON file, which is marked here by Swagger 2.0, that defines an API. Now this is still in preview, so it's not perfect, and I'm actually going to have to go in and fix it a little bit on the other side. But it's done most of the heavy lifting for me here. And now I'm going to go ahead and generate the new Swagger because I just changed and added that new function. And it'll do that. I'll save it, and now I'm going to export that to Flow or Power Apps. And I could, in theory, take this URL and paste it in, and it would get the Swagger that way, but I found that didn't work. So I don't know if I think it might be because it's in preview, but if I download it, it works just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and download it. I assume they'll fix that before they put it into production. And now I'm going to go into Flow, and I'm creating a custom connector. I already had created the connector, so I'm just going to edit the connector that I had. And it's kind of the same experience in either case. I'm just going to go in and upload that same Swagger file, which basically tells the connector, hey, this is what you can connect, what you're connecting to. This is the API you're connecting to. All you need to make a custom connector is a Swagger definition and an icon. That's all you need, and I already had the icon there. So it makes it real easy. Now security, I did that with an application key. So let's continue on to security, and basically it's an API key. And when I type this in, this is just what it's going to prompt the user. If I were to create a new connection, it would say, what's the API key? And I would have to type in that same string that I transferred around. So that's like the security on this thing, is that API key. So it's kind of cool. I'm not running as an end user anyway. I'm running actually as an application identity inside of Azure. So I'll give it a name. And here's the thing that I mentioned, that there are some bugs. It didn't pick up the arguments to my function. So and notice that the little query and path, the path and the query where I could add them, those are grayed out. The workaround, again, this is kind of new stuff, is to come in here and import from a sample, and I just make a sample URL that looks like my URL. So I'm just going to, doesn't matter what it is, any server, path equals something, and site URL equals something. And now that's enough for it to get the pattern of it. Click import, and now bang, I now have the little ability to pass in a path and a site URL. Okay? So now I could mess with the response at this point and pass out more than one thing, but I'm going to keep it simple and just pass the entire response back, which is going to be that concatenated URL. So now I can update that connection, and now I can actually test it from here as well. Again, the UI is slightly clunky. If I had clicked test and tried to test it, it would fail because I hadn't saved it yet. You just have to kind of know to hit save in the middle. And now here I am, and I can type and so I goofed this. I can type a path, and I actually put the site URL, but it doesn't matter because as long as they get concatenated, I'm going to be happy. And I can put in the other half, and then I can test the operation, and it's actually going to go out to Azure and concatenate those two strings and come back, and so this is what the request looked like, and that's the response. So they did indeed get concatenated. All right, so now let's go back to our flow, which had the broken URL, and I'm going to open that bad boy up, and I'm going to add a new action in the middle, and I can literally look for flow helpers. That's my own little guy. And there are all the flow helpers that I created. So one of them is get document URL from JavaScript. I can click that. And look, now there's my path and my site URL. I can take the path that came back from SharePoint, and I can type in the site URL. Maybe. And I can go ahead and update the flow. Oh, but wait a minute, I'm not done. Instead of the file path that didn't have the whole URL, I'm going to go ahead and put the body that I got back from that function call. Okay, so now that's done. That's now running. So let's test it. So I'm going to go back to my on-prem document library and find another one of my little demo files, drop it in there. In there somewhere. Cool buildings. Pizza sign up, whatever. All right, put that in there, and now I go back to my flow, check it. It eventually runs, and if I go into Yammer, look, it's actually put the entire URL in there, so it worked. The only problem is, once again, Yammer breaks because there's spaces in my URL, and it just assumes that the space is the end of the URL. So what I really should have done in my function was put the little %20s in there instead of the spaces. So let's go do that. The cool thing about this is I don't have to repeat all those steps. Unless I'm adding a new method or changing the arguments or something, all I have to do is come in here and edit the Azure flow. And this is the weird way that you do. I love JavaScript. There's no easy way to replace all the occurrences of something in a string in JavaScript. So I'm going to actually split it into an array around the spaces and then join it back together with %20s. And if I test that, it will give me back the URL with some spaces, with some %20s in it, right? Okay, and now if I go back to once again, retracing steps, if I go back to my document library and put yet another document, all my documents have spaces in them, the names, and my library has spaces in the name, so I just know this is a problem. And when I go back to my Yammer, I'll go back and look at the flow, make sure it ran. You can see that there were a few failures in there that I didn't show you. Okay, that's good, that worked, and now, look, there it is with the %20s in it. Ta-da! All right, so that's kind of cool, but I'm not satisfied, because now if I click that link, what's going to happen? It's going to download the document, and nobody wants to download the document. They want to view the document in the web browser. So in order to do that, I need to get the Office Online Server URL. And I can give you a hint about this. The Office Online Server URL has GUIDs in it. It has the ID of the list and the ID of the document. And so there is no way for me to really do this because the SharePoint trigger gave me a path name. It just didn't give me those IDs. So to make this work, I had to write a more advanced and this is where it starts to get interesting, because you could do this with anything, right? I had to write a more advanced Azure function, which I won't make you watch me write, but I'll show you the result. So if I come in here and, whoops. Let me just show you it working first. So I'm gonna put this document in there, and I've got the new one working, and I go into Yammer, And look, I've got that long, gnarly URL that we all know and love, and it opens up the document. So that's where we're going. The Azure function that did that exposes almost the same UI as the other one. It's just get the doc view link and then put that into the message. Here's the Azure function. So to make this work, I actually wrote the function in C#, and I used the client object model for SharePoint. Now you're getting into developer land, but it's nice to know that you can do this and you don't have to completely give up. So I'm actually going to come in here and I'm going to do, here's my result path. I parse out the path and the site URL. I'm trying to be nice here, so this could be coming in on my query string or in the body of my request. And then I'm going to build this, and then I'm going to come in and get a client context, which is actually a secured way of reaching into that SharePoint site. And then I'm going to do a call called context.web.getFileByServerRelativeURL. And that is what's going to return that magic URL to me. And then I can go in, and I even get to decide what kind of URL I want. I want the view, I could get the edit, I could get any of those URLs. And in order to make this work, I had to secure this with a certificate. So I had to generate a digital certificate here at flowhelpers.pfx. And then I had to extract some values from that certificate. There's the rest of the code, fairly simple from there on. I had to go into Azure AD and register an application. So that Flow Helpers is now also an application that has its own app ID. And this is where I'm declaring it. And I took some of the values out of that certificate and put them into the manifest of this application. Then I went in and gave the application permission to read and write into SharePoint. So this application now can actually do anything it can read and write items and lists in all site collections, and it can have full control of all site collections. I didn't really need to get into this anymore. So I'm really elevating privileges now. I can do something that no individual user maybe has permission to do. Now, I set up this Azure function. I was a full Azure admin. So this is not something that people could do illicitly, right? But it's a really good way, actually, to elevate permissions. And if I had created a list item, it would be created by that application. So we'd be back to that sort of application identity again. Does that make sense?
Can you clarify why you had to go and register it in that baby?
Yeah, because otherwise there was no... Okay, I could have done a different approach. I chose this way. I could have put a username and password. I mean, I had to somehow... The Azure function is persona non grata. It comes in, it's just anonymous code. So it has to log into SharePoint somehow. So I guess I chose to do the extra work of doing the certificate because I think that's the best practice. The other option would be I could have a service account, or I could use my own account and put my own username and password in there and open the client connection that way, and then it would look like I did it. But the problem with that is that I'd be, now if the password changes, I got to go fix it and all this kind of stuff, right? All right, so let's take another step and look at logic apps. And I think you'll be kind of surprised. Logic apps is the parent of 5 minutes. Logic app is good because this is the last demo. Logic apps is sort of like the parent of or grandparent of Flow. So I'm going to do this in Visual Studio, but you can actually do it in a web browser. So I'm going to actually show it in the web browser as well. But I just wanted to show it in Visual Studio so you can see, yeah, your enterprise developers are going to be happy about this. And yeah, you can check it into source control. You can have continuous deployment. You can all those cool things. I'm going to go and make a new logic app. And this is what might surprise you. I'm going to just go ahead and open up the logic app, which is a JSON file. And what am I going to get after the little green line goes by a couple times? is I'm going to get something that looks actually pretty familiar. So I'm going to connect to my Azure environment, pick my resource group, wait a bit, and then I get this long thing, I get a video I could watch, and hey, wait a minute, this looks a lot like Flow. As a matter of fact, these are the same actions and the same triggers. Yeah, they are the same, which is kind of cool. If you write one for Logic Apps, it works in Flow. If you write one for Flow, it works in Logic Apps. This is kind of cool and scary all at the same time. I'm not sure how this works. Maybe somebody knows. It remembered every connection I've made inside of Azure. So all the connectors I'd set up in Flow as logged in as me are now being offered to me here. So it's actually registering them all in the same place, which as far as I know, they haven't really documented where that is. Exactly. Exactly the point of the demo. So it is really just a Logic app with a little bit of a simpler user experience. But the nice thing is that now I could actually check this into source control and I can release it. One of the things you'll notice, and I'm not going to have time to demo, but there's a deployment. So here's my Azure functions. So one of the cool things is that I didn't have to use the Swagger now. Since I'm in Azure, I can talk directly to the function, and it pulled up all my functions for me. And I can pick that get.docURL function. But what I got, the downside of that is that now I have to kind of configure it more manually. So I know I'm going to pass these things in on a GET request, and I'm going to use I could pass it in the request body, but that's not really allowed on a GET request. I need the query string. And so I actually need to come in here, and it accepts, even though it's a query string, it wants JSON here. The fun part about this is that I don't think it's documented, so I had to figure this out. And I'm going to go ahead and put my, of course, I'm going to put my query strings in JSON format, obviously. And I'm going to go ahead and make that. I'm going to put my path in there. I'm going to leave a space for that, close my JSON object, and then drop that path right into place. And now I can go ahead and send this into Yammer. And the same exact Yammer pops up, and it already knows who I am, and I can come in here and post that message. So I'm going to let this run while we talk a little bit, but basically you can imagine it's going to work. See this little script right here, deploy Azure Resource Group? That would actually deploy this, and when I deployed it, I could connect it to a different site. So this is how I can actually go in, and I'm going to have to reconnect when I go. If I had a staging site and a test site, or a dev site and a testing site and a production site, I could actually do this and run that script and connect and install it into the different sites and set up my connectors differently in each case. So really nice for being able to do that. Now I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. It wants my Logic App name because I didn't put that in otherwise, so I'll just make a name for it and go ahead and save that. And now it will sit there and deploy for a minute. Checking deployment status, and eventually it will come up and it will have deployed. So now if I go back to my handy dandy demo environment, I'm actually just going to go into and show you what this looks like inside of Logic Apps. So here's the web-based way to do the same thing. I go into my Logic Apps. Notice that this Logic App has not, I selected the Logic App, notice that it has never run. If I go to the Logic App Designer, oh, there it is. Right? I didn't need Visual Studio at all. I could have done the whole thing in the web browser. I just showed you Visual Studio because maybe I wanted to use that for source control or something, but I don't really need it. And now I can come back and do my little thing, and I'll drop a file into the library, and one more time. I really thought there would be pizza, that I could make pizza jokes. Not that I'm disappointed, really. The raw bar and the nice stuff is really good. So let me just refresh this a couple times. No runs, no runs. Oh, look, it's succeeded right there. And now if I go to Yammer, this time I put it in the legal team group. So there's the legal team, and there it is. Ta-da! And I can click it, and some delicious pizza comes up. Okay, so there we are. So the last thing, I'm just going to real quickly go back to Visual Studio just to show one thing, which is that this whole thing, this whole design experience, if I go into code view, all that fun designing I did is actually just generating this big JSON file. So because I can get to that in Visual Studio, I can now check it in, do source control, I can diff it, see what changed since the last time, and it just gives me a whole ton of capability there.
From the perspective of the power users, like if you have an admin app monitoring, they need to have Azure tenant access to see the logic app, right? There's no UI like the flow UI.
That's correct. So this would be, I think the scenario where you would use this is more like I created the flow in my department, my team, and I got everything working and I'm all happy. Or maybe I'm a consultant and I got hired by a business person to do it and I did it, and we had this whole discussion about how to get a service account, so I wonder how that goes. But then it's time for it to grow up and be a real enterprise app. So yeah, now you're probably working with the Azure admin and getting permission to do this. That's correct. All right, so let's kind of sum things up here. I only have a couple slides left. I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, but I kept thinking of things to put on here. I like doing these little consumer reports comparisons. Out of the box, only 2010 has it. Content linked approvals, only 2010 has it. Coming in the future, the logic app or flow near you. Oh, I should have put the future there too. Rich set of actions within a site. Really, the old one still wins. They've got way more useful actions for SharePoint right now than even the 2013 one did. But you're stuck within the site collection. If you want to work outside of one site, or if you want to work outside of SharePoint, your only options are flow or logic apps. If you want to act on behalf of the user who initiated it, you can't use flow or logic apps. If you want to elevate permissions, I guess the way I looked at this was, I like the 2013 app step. I like that better than the impersonation step. So if you had to run as a actual end user, or create that weird service account, or if you had to write code, I took a quarter of a point off for that and gave them only half credit for elevating permissions, whereas I thought that the 2013 one has a better solution. Extending it with custom actions, I think flow and logic apps with that ability to make an Azure function, I think that totally trumps the others. It's much more powerful than the others. Complex logic, this one would be interesting to discuss afterwards over some of the delicious libations that they've provided. My thought is what I've seen myself doing and other people doing in Azure Logic Apps and Flow that I used to see us doing in 2010 is having 5 flows that do different parts of a task. With 2013 workflows, I didn't go into this because, like I say, I'm not sure what the future is there, but it was gorgeous, right? You could have flow, you could have workflows within workflows, and you could modularize the whole thing, but still have it be one unit, one workflow. So I actually thought that that was the best for handling complex logic. A personal solution, we're looking at Flow. And really, that's the only option. And a manageable enterprise solution, we're looking at Logic Apps. So kind of parting thought is a reality check, which is that Microsoft is moving to Flow and Logic Apps. The old SharePoint workflows are kind of a dead end. It is clear they have not made an investment in years, except maybe a bug fix here and there. There seems to be no further future investment in the SharePoint workflows. And if you've ever been to the new modern UI for a document library and tried to find the old workflows, it's like 7 levels deep. It's like you got to go to the More menu and then the Advanced menu and then this and that, and finally you get to those old workflows. You kind of get the feeling that Microsoft, and then there's a big Flow button right there. So you get the feeling Microsoft really wants us to move to this stuff. The other reality check is that the cloud is a given. The on-prem gateway is very nice, but notice that my flows still ran in the cloud. So yes, I could have a flow that takes data from my on-prem SQL server and copies it to my on-prem SharePoint server, but that data is going through the cloud. And if the cloud wasn't there and I didn't pay my Azure bill, it would not work. So that's just kind of the reality that we're in. So here are some resources. I'll leave this up. I love this video tutorial. I thought this was the best one I found getting started by our friend Laura Rogers, who you may know. This one is buried, so you'll probably never find it. Lightning Tools sponsored a series of webcasts, and so this is listed on the Lightning Tools website. But she told me about it personally, and it's just awesome. And then a whole bunch of things on getting started with Azure Functions, connecting them to Flow, the gateway, and how to do the logic apps. And then this last one, somebody actually compiled this awesome kind of library of everything you can imagine, links to all the resources, videos, tutorials, references, and everything all in one place. So I leave you with that, and I thank you for coming. Hope it was a good session. Don't tell me the table almost broke while I was there. That would be a new experience for me to have. I've had the projector break. I've had the network break. I've never had the table fall apart.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Specific things to work around the.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of interoperability between Flow and SharePoint workflows?
It is, and I almost demoed it, but I thought I partly didn't think I'd have time, and I think I did run against the time.
Yeah.
And it's not as useful as I thought. So yes, all of them can be triggered by a list item creation, and all of them create a list item. So I tried this, and you can actually have a flow that creates a list item, put some information in there, and then the SharePoint workflow wakes up and does something. But where I think is more useful, the only time I've actually found it useful is when you want to do something outside of SharePoint. So you have a SharePoint workflow, maybe it's an existing workflow, and I really want to post something in Slack, right?
Yeah.
And I can't do that from a SharePoint list. What do I do? So you just create a list item, you make a post in Slack list somewhere, create that item, and then have the flow wake up and just copy some data out of Slack. Yeah, it works. It's a little bit of a Rube Goldberg thing to do.
It always is.
It always is. I mean, so just be aware, like if for some reason the workflow doesn't fire, there's not going to be any record, no alarms are going to go off, it's just going to fall on the floor. But probably it's fine for most cases. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And let me ask you this, because I'd love some feedback on this talk, and would you like to see that as a demo the first time? Okay, I'll add that in. So anyway, I'll be here mingling afterwards, and I would love to get any informal feedback. Are there any other questions before I don't want to totally steal all the time? So, okay.
Let's go for Bob. So in terms of upcoming events, we're one fish in a big pond here in the Boston area. There's a lot of complementary user groups around here, whether it's for SharePoint, PowerShell, and other topics. So if you're interested in diving in deeper, definitely check it out. Bob Drum is actually one of the co-founders and co-hosts of the Boston SharePoint user group. So definitely good things there. A couple of events coming up. There's a SharePoint Saturday coming up in New York City. If you've never been to a SharePoint Saturday, it's kind of like this session, but like 6 of them back to back in multiple different rooms. So you can choose your own path based on what you're most interested in. It's a free event, so definitely check that out. And then, of course, Microsoft Ignite is coming to Florida this September. So does anyone else have any other community events that are coming up? All right, so next month we'll be meeting June 15th. Chris Bortlick is going to talk to us about securing and governing Office 365. We'll be meeting in the Microsoft offices in Burlington, so come check us out there. Community announcements. Does anybody have any problems with Office 365? Any tips? Anyone hiring or looking for work?
Do we have enough time?
I can give you a lot of
Mark's not allowed to share problems. Anyone running into anything that want to bring to the open table? Or hiring or looking for work?
Yeah, I clicked on this Gmail link, Just Google document. And all of a sudden, all my Office 365 documents were decrypted. Only I had backup of 5.
So again, huge thanks to Backup 5 for sponsoring and hosting us tonight. All right, so we have a few raffle items.